Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys in the Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I'm William Bell, and with me is Don Preston. Don, how are you today?
Doing great, William. Doing absolutely great. And
Good.
I was glad to be home from the seminar. Had an absolutely fantastic time there at the seminar that you sponsored there in Memphis. Really a great seminar.
Yeah, we are still, getting buzz from that conference that we had over the weekend or last week, and everybody was talking about the great presentation that you did, and there were a lot of great presentations in this conference, and so we are really, really pleased with the effort that everybody put forth. We had some great fellowship. You met a lot of people that we had not met before and had talked to, online from various, at various times and various places. Had people traveling as far away as from Canada, Ontario, Canada. And of course, we had Joseph with us from India, but he's been sort of traversing the country for a while. And so he doubled back to Memphis again to attend the conference. And he said that his eyes were opened to information he had never heard before. And what's really exciting is that he's very, very interested in taking this information back to India. He's the gentleman that works with the person that I've been working with in Nakrikal, India, with the Nakrikal School of Preaching. Well, back in May, they graduated 36 students, and they have about 45 students enrolled now. So this is very, very exciting to be able to have the opportunity to be working with the preaching school, even though it's far away in India, but they've given us invitations to come. And I got a sort of bug in my ear the other day that if we were planning to go to India, that someone would be willing to help with the expenses to go, not simply to India, but to several of the places where we've been invited. Such as there are several invitations in Africa, and we've got invitations in the Philippines and possibly in Brazil. But that is just totally exciting to me. I'm definitely looking forward to that becoming a reality. And I think, with the opportunity we have to send materials, and by the way, they are asking for materials for lessons to be sent to them, whether they're on, MP3 files, access on YouTube, which they're already doing. But if we got books and any lessons that we can put together for them, they are asking for the material. They want to teach it, and so they're looking forward to it. And I'm really excited about that because they reach a lot of people in India, with the gospel, people who seem to have a greater thirst and hunger than we experience here. So that's very, very good.
Well, I was certainly thrilled myself to visit with Joseph. I know he came up to me after my very first lesson and was shaking my hand, and he wouldn't let go of my hand. And he would just shake my hand, and tell me how much the lesson had challenged him. And, I would express appreciation, and he would talk. He might release my hand. Then he'd want to shake it again. And then he'd want to shake it again. Then he'd want to shake it again. But he told me what he told you, that the lessons that were being presented there were just simply incredible. They were expanding his knowledge of the Word. They were challenging him on every level, and that he was beyond excited to learn the things that he was learning. And so it really is, as you say, it's just so tremendously exciting to have an impact and an influence like that. I asked him if he knew Brother Prabhu Das from India, and he had actually heard his name. And so if things develop about the possibility of us going to India, then perhaps we can combine with Prabhu Das, who has been working there in India very, very faithfully for years and years and years, and doing a magnificent job of spreading the gospel and sharing the word with the people there. So it will truly be interesting, needless to say, tremendously exciting, to see how all of this plays out in the coming time, to see what the Lord has in store. It's like you just said, there is an openness, there is an excitement, there is a willingness to learn in India that you very often do not find here in America. And so the opportunity to be able, number one, to provide materials. And William, you and I need to confer in the days ahead to discuss perhaps what they would need the most. And Preterist Research Institute will be more than happy to contribute materials to the school there. If need be, on a continuing basis. We can certainly send MP3s, we can send DVDs, we can send PDFs, and then, of course, we can send hard copies as well. And anyone who is remotely familiar, as you mentioned during one of your discussions of that situation over there, the cost of the materials is not insignificant, but so much of the real, true expense is it's in the postage. I mean, my goodness gracious. And as you know, William, I send books to Ethiopia all the time. I'm just getting ready to send a box of books to Ethiopia. And the books that I will send will cost in excess of $90 to send one single box of books that will be probably no more than 5 books. And so, given the cost of shipping these days, if there are folks out there who have an interest in helping us to share the word.
Call from unavailable.
Are you hearing that, Don? I'm trying to.
I am hearing that very loud and very clearly. But anyway, to reiterate, if there are those out there who listen to this program who would be interested in helping share the cost of shipping, I mean, we're more than happy to give the books themselves, that type of material, the DVDs, even the MP3s, etc. But if there's anyone out there that would be interested in sharing the cost of the shipping, that would be tremendously, tremendously appreciated. So if you're interested in that, then let us know. Like I said, I'll be getting ready a box of books to send to Ethiopia within the next 2 weeks. They've been asking for certain materials now for over a month, and I have yet to send them. But we've got to put that together because, as I have mentioned on this radio program before, there are now at least 2, I believe there are 3, full preterist churches in Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia. 3 full preterist churches as a direct result of distribution of materials over there. And that's just super exciting stuff. I mean, it's really, really exciting to know and to have a part in that type of growth throughout the world. And so here we have the opportunity to do the exact same identical thing in India, and there are other schools over there as well. There are other contexts over there that are wanting materials. So the doors are continuing to open, the opportunities are continually presenting themselves, and we certainly do not want to fail to take opportunity of that. Who knows? This is what's so exciting. Who knows what the future holds as a result of us now providing books and materials to preacher schools in India, to churches in India, to individuals in India and Ethiopia and wherever. What does that bode for the future? There is literally an unlimited future for the growth of covenant eschatology as a result of the efforts that we can put out now.
Yeah, it was great also that, with the live stream, we were able to reach out to them, and they actually watched the entire conference on live stream. So, that helped a great deal. They were very impressed with that. We also have an opportunity in Ghana. There is a brother there that Steve Baisden has worked with, and I am now working with him and conversing with him. He has given an invitation to come there. He has 2 congregations there, and he's definitely studying full preterism. He considers himself a full preterist, and it's just, wanting to get deeper and deeper into study of the Word, making sure that he understands things so that he can communicate them well. So there's another opportunity, and I had one, as I mentioned earlier, from the Philippines. But this is a result of, all the work that's being done, all the materials that are being produced, or the videos, et cetera, that we are producing. They're having an impact, and the leverage that can come from them. It's been a minute since I've done my regular live YouTube because I've been so busy with the conference and had some other things going. But those videos continue to work. I'm really pleased to see the one on the response to John Hagee's material continuing to grow. That video has over 10,000 views, and it's growing. So we're delighted that that's happening. But we had some good conversations with a couple of people, particularly on Sunday after Sunday morning service. We had some visitors from, a local church who came that morning, and we shared some material with them, set up some agreements to have some Bible studies. One gentleman who was supposed to or had planned to come to the conference was unable to make it because of something, he had pressing going on. I did go by and meet with him today, spoke with him. I'll spend a little time with him tonight. And that is also encouraging to see that, we're getting some fruit from the conference in terms of being able to, set up these classes and these conversations with others locally and help them along the way. And it was interesting that one of the persons that I talked to this past Sunday after our service, they said, well, if our preacher knew this, I believe he would teach it. Well, I had an opportunity to talk to that preacher some years ago. And at that time, he certainly wasn't of the persuasion that he would teach it. And I certainly have to see it. But I also have had some to say with some of the preachers, or at least one preacher that we have talked to in the past, and that I had contacted about a year ago, that he was going to insist that he have a conversation because of the things that, he's been learning from what I've shared with him. So we're, really, really good. As a matter of fact, I just see a message from the gentleman from Ghana popping up on my screen. But anyway, those are just some of the things that are happening. The people were they really, really enjoyed themselves at the conference. They thought that, everything was great. I heard them even talking about how good the food was, and it was just some sandwiches and everything, but they really, really enjoyed it. And the conversations, we had a chance to go out and to your favorite place to have dinner one night, and I think everybody enjoyed that as well. So it was really good. Oh, let me tell this story because I didn't tell it, and that was Daniel and Kyle came over to the house, right? And they spent the night with me. Well, they thought originally that they were going to be sleeping in the music room. Well, I wasn't going to put them in the music room, so we had a room for each of them. And so when I got back, you know how just dead dog tired I was. They wanted to go up in the music room and play. So I said, okay, let's go. So we went up to the music room and played, and man, they played until my eyes just couldn't stay open. I said, look, guys, I'm going to leave you here. Well, about the time right before, I think, I guess about 15, 20 minutes before I left, Kyle came over. And so he came over and started playing with them as well. And they were up there singing and playing. It was late in the night. And then I came back up and studied a little bit and before going to bed. And I know that they had to have been up there at least as late as 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe even later. I'm not sure. I did hear what Kyle went, but I mean, they were like kids in the candy store. So I thought I'd just, blast them out on that, but I didn't mind whatsoever. Leora never heard anything from them. And, so she slept good. It didn't bother me at all because I couldn't hear them from the part of the house that I was in. But they had a really, really good time singing and playing all night, just having fun with the instrument. So,
well, that's the energy of youth, as they say.
There you go.
Yeah, and those are times in which you make memories and you create bonds, and you strengthen friendships like never before. I mean, times like that are truly invaluable. They're wonderful, wonderful times.
They really are. They really, really are. Well, all right. We have information for the message tonight. I know we're on probably number 9 in the series of talking about the Millennial Temple. I know that you've been presenting some lessons on that. And, I know we mentioned briefly about your lesson on the feast days. And, that exegesis through Colossians chapter 2, 14 through 17, tied in with the Gospel of John was just amazing. I remember some years ago, I think, I'm trying to find out which, I don't remember which seminar it was, but I remember some years ago when I started seeing the temple typology in John from studies in Haggai, et cetera, and I saw just how powerful almost on every page there was temple, theology there, temple typology. And then for you to pull in the feast days as you did was just absolutely incredible. It was a great lesson, and I knew at that point I said we're going to have Don back just to teach on the feast days. Maybe one afternoon or one weekend that you come and teach on those because we want that kind of material deposited into the minds. And as you and I say all the time, we talk to people. And many of them don't have a clue about what the feast days are. They have no idea about how they line up with the events of Christ and his life, whether it's the spring festivals or the fall festivals. And we get so many objections in eschatology because they're not putting those feast days in their proper perspective and seeing how the eschatological events in Matthew 24, 25, Hebrews 9, and the book of Revelation, the Gospel of John, et cetera, throughout are falling right in line with those feast days. And so you and I are very impressed with them. I have people now asking me, where can I get some material on that? As a matter of fact, the gentleman today asked me, where can I get some material on the feast days? So it's definitely something I think is going to, once it gets spread, when people really become knowledgeable of it in general, it's going to have a tremendous impact. I'm even hearing now, with the gentleman who's been teaching the Hebrew Israelites, he's been covering them and, helping people to try to understand what it's all about. So very, very powerful information and just really, really thankful that you were able to share that with us.
Well, as I had mentioned to you before I even got to Memphis, I had been just immersing myself in a study of John particularly, and his incorporation of the feast days and his conflation of the feast days with the life of Jesus. And I had been just absolutely, literally blown away. And I've been accumulating books down through the years. I don't always read a book at the exact time that I buy it. And I'd been accumulating some books. And years ago, I had purchased a book. What I had purchased was a photostatic reprint of T.F. Glasson's book, Moses in the Fourth Gospel. And I had scanned it some years ago and was very impressed with it, but I didn't just get down and read it closely. Well, in order to prepare for the seminar, because I wanted to do the correlation between Colossians chapter 2, 14 to 17 and the feast days, because after all, Paul makes it a point of saying that the law, i.e. the feast days, the new moons, the feast days, and the Sabbaths, were still, when he wrote, shadows of the good things that had not yet come. And as I pointed out at the very beginning of my lesson, there's a real problem with saying on the one hand that the law had been nailed to the cross, and then turning around and acknowledging that those feast days were still shadows of good things to come. How could they still be shadows if they had been done away? I mean, it doesn't make sense. And I remember seeing that years and years ago and beginning to try to put together the initial thoughts on it. So as I began to study more and more on the feast days and to see the significance of Paul's terminology there, I just became more and more excited and more convinced of what a tragedy it is in the world of futurism. You know, really and honestly, the only people that pay attention to the feast days are the Hebrew Israelite movement, the Messianic Jew movement, or dispensationalism. And dispensationalism, of course, is part and parcel of the Messianic Jewish movement. They have some slight nuances. But the point of fact is that in amillennialism and postmillennialism, both, you and I both know, William, that historically in the amillennial world, the world in which you and I were accustomed, there is virtually no mention whatsoever of the feast days. If there's any mention at all, the only mention is, okay, Christ is our Passover, and his resurrection fulfills the feast days, and Pentecost is the fulfillment of the fourth feast days. After that, there is literally no discussion of the last three feast days of Israel in the amillennial world. If there is, I have to say, all the time of me growing up, attending one lectureship after another, reading one lectureship book after another, attending one gospel meeting after another, I never at any time heard a single minister ever discuss the importance of the fulfillment of the last three feast days of Israel. And
well, it's about the same for me.
Go ahead.
I've not heard them at all. It's like we said on last week's broadcast, when Bill Cannon guys first mentioned them, it was like, wow, where'd this bomb come from?
Yes.
and then later with David Curtis, those were the first two times that I had ever heard anything on them, and certainly a complete, exegesis, as both of them did during the times when they did them. And so this is just something that has been just totally ignored, and largely because of our ignorance or, just failure to really delve into the Old Testament. And that's one of the things that you were just mentioning a moment ago. With those groups that focus on the Old Testament, they certainly get into those things. But, we have come from a tradition that basically jettisoned the Old Testament and just said, okay, we're just all about the New Testament. And when you cut off the roots, you just don't get the fruit.
Without a doubt. And, it's such a tragedy that in the dispensational world, and I have to tell you, there are some dispensational writers who truly have done a remarkable and exciting job of discussing and bringing out the typology, the feast days. They have done incredible research into the rabbinic writings and what the rabbis said about the feast days and about what the feast days represented. Now, as I pointed out at the beginning of one of my lessons, when you talk about the rabbis and their views of the feast days, you have to understand that to a certain extent, and you have to be aware that a lot of what is said is from the Talmud. And the Talmud is an absolutely horrid compilation of rabbinic sayings and teachings. That's not to say every word of it is bad. It is just simply to say that the things that it permits, the things that it teaches, are an abomination as found in Torah itself. Furthermore, to take that one step further, sometimes a lot of what is said about the feast days and some of the rabbinic literature is Kabbalistic. Now, the Kabbal and the Kabbalistic teachings were so mystical, so allegorical, as to be beyond reason, as to be beyond logic. And so you really have to glean what is being said about the feast days in the rabbinic writings and compare it with what the Bible says, because a lot of times what the Bible has to say is almost a Reader's Digest version. But what's so interesting is that when you go to the book of John, for instance, Jesus participated without condemnation in some of the traditional aspects of the feast days, and he took advantage of what was being said, done, and practiced in order to point to himself. The pouring of the water that I mentioned in my second letter, that was not technically a part of the Feast of Sukkot. There is no technical legal provision for that in Leviticus chapter 23 or Numbers chapter 29. In other words, there is no command for the priest to go down to the pool of Siloam, gather water, go up to the temple, and pour it out. And somebody might respond, well, yeah, and that's the reason. The reason for that is because in Leviticus, Numbers, they didn't even have they didn't have Jerusalem, they didn't have the temple, they didn't have the altar. Well, that's true, but at least there should have been some provision for that, you would think, and yet there's not. And yet, that is what was at that moment of the pouring of the water, which took place for 7 straight days. Jesus stood up and took advantage of that. We might call it an innovation. That's what we might call it today. But Jesus never condemned it. He simply took advantage of it to point to himself. And the same thing with the burning of the lights. Every single night of the feast days of Sukkot. That there's not a provision for that as it was practiced in the first century. And yet it was a major, major part. It was almost a climax to the festivals of the day, festivities of the day. And so Jesus, once again, took advantage of it. And in John chapter 8, verse 12, said, I am the light of the world. And so, again, when we study the feast days, we have to be careful certainly not to get caught up in the Kabbalistic aspects of it, certainly not in all of the Talmudic aspects of it, we have to be careful and to be able to take part, or I should say to point out and to take advantage of in our teaching the parts that are indicated. And that comes in, for instance, in the lulav. This was the branch, if you please, part of what they called the four kinds. That's what the Jews referred to it, the four kinds. And what they meant by that was the myrtle, the willow, and the palm. And those three branches or stems were all tied together, and it was called the lulav. And that was put in the right hand during the ceremony, during the feast day of Sukkot. And then in the left hand, they held what was known as the etrog, and that was a citrus fruit, normally a lemon or something like that. And as I pointed out, this, William, is so interesting to me. You don't find the etrog commanded, so far as I'm aware. I may have missed something, but as far as I'm aware, it's not actually commanded in Torah. But it was part and parcel, a vital part of the festivities of the day found in John chapter 7 and 8. Well, the etrog, as I mentioned, was some kind of a citrus fruit. And as I pointed out in my lesson, it was called the fruit of paradise. Now, think of the implications of that. Think of the typology of that. I mean, here we have all of the imagery of the garden and the anticipation of the new heaven and the new earth, the new paradise, if you please, the new garden of God. And that's what the Jews meant by that, by the way. That was the symbolism of the etrog. The symbolism was they were holding in their hand a piece of citrus fruit that they called the fruit of paradise, which pointed to, in their Hebraic way of thinking, pointed forward to the time in which God would create the paradise of his own paradise, the new heaven, the new earth, the garden, where the tree of life would put forth its fruit for the healing of the nations. And so, again, while those things may not have been specifically commanded, they were part and parcel of the ceremony, and Jesus never condemned it. He took part in it. He took advantage of it to say, I am the true bread of life, which they were celebrating all of this during Sukkot, because Sukkot was a celebration of the Exodus and God's provision, as I pointed out, of the three gifts, the manna and the bread and the light. And Jesus took part of all of that and made it point to him. It truly is absolutely beautiful imagery. It truly does expand our ability to appreciate how Jesus was a Jew. And he was a faithful Jew. I mean, after all, did he not say, do not think that I came to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. And so he went there as a Jew into the very heart of Judaism, participating of the central core festivals of Judaism. And he pointed that humongous audience to himself as the fulfillment of everything they were looking for in those feast days. They had just gone through Rosh Hashanah. They've just gone through Yom Kippur. And the 10 days of awe and the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That was a time of fear. That was literally a time of fear, because Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah were the time when the 3 books were opened. And by the way, anybody wants to discover and delve into the opening of the books, go to get a copy of Albert Edersheim's The Temple and Its Ministry at the Time of Jesus the Messiah. And you'll find there that Alfred Edersheim discusses the opening of the books at the time of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The opening of the books was so vitally interrelated to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that they talked about the opening of the books at both times. And you had the book of life, the book of death, and the book of works. And the book of life is for those who are righteous and had been righteous during the year. The book of death is for the disobedient. And they were judged as disobedient and condemned. And there was the book of life, the book of works, in which everything that a person ever did or had ever done was in those books. And their judgment took place at that time, and it was determined whether or not their name would then be written in the book of life or in the book of death. I mean, surely anyone familiar with Revelation can see where John is getting his discussion. And it's all related to the Jewish feast days.
It most certainly is. I was thinking earlier when you made that statement about Jesus taking those events and then giving them meaning, events that they were using, but he would take them and then ascribe a meaning to them that he found in himself. And sometimes it's important, I guess, to do that when people, they have their notions, but if you can take what they're saying and show them the meaning, even of their misguided concepts in Scripture, that probably would be a good pattern to follow, as long as we do it, correctly and effectively. But yes, I mean the layout of the feast days throughout, these books, the Gospel of John and the Book of Revelation, and of course, as it's been said several times that the Book of Revelation is John's Olivet Discourse. So once you map out the feast days in Matthew, for example, and see them unfold there, it's little wonder that you find such emphasis on them in the book of Revelation. And it's just, unmistakable once you get the focus. Once someone points it out to you, it's like that light bulb pops on and you continue to see them.
Oh, and I need to mention this, that several people ask me what book they should get. There's no single book that I wish there was a single book that I could point to and say, well, I got everything from there. But they're just a host of books that I've been reading over the last several years, actually. But for a commentary on Revelation that does an absolutely fantastic job of drawing out the symbolism of the feast days, David Chilton's book, Days of Vengeance. And keep in mind, when David Chilton wrote his book, Days of Vengeance, he was not yet a full preterist. And yet, as he would later say, he truly did not understand how he could have written the things that he did and not be a full preterist already. He actually has a footnote in his commentary on Revelation saying that the full preterist view is heresy. And yet within just a few years, within 10 years, he was himself a full preterist. But I would suggest to you that a lot of the things that David Chilton wrote concerning the feast days, and I'm telling you, some of the things that he said concerning the feast days are literally mind-blowing. They expand your horizons. They are just tremendously insightful. And he cites some wonderful, wonderful sources. So for those of you who have asked about a great source to understand the feast days, I would suggest that you get a copy of David Chilton's Days of Vengeance. And I still have a couple of, maybe one or two. That may be all I've got left. I don't know. I'm no longer able to get that book at a discount thanks to certain people breaking a contract with me that I had. But all of that aside, if you want a copy of David Chilton's book, Days of Vengeance, I've got, like I said, I've only got one or two on hand, and I won't be able to get any more at the discounted rate. So better take advantage of the fact that I've got one or two on hand now if you are interested in one. Other than that, you'll have to pay the full price on Amazon if it's still even available. I do not know if it's even available still there. I'll be really honest. I do not know. But that's a great, great resource. So all of that said, all of this has directly, specifically, to do with our discussion of the Messianic temple.
Let me point out one other resource. Now, this book is written by a dispensationalist. And the dispensational emphasis is there once the exegesis is done, and maybe even a little bit before. But if you're looking for something simple that you can digest very easily just to get the basic concepts down and the names of them and various other points about the feast days, Mark Biltz has a book called The Four Blood Moons. That was back during the Four Blood Moon craze a few years ago with John Hagee, et cetera. But you can get that book on Amazon, one of their, ebooks or Kindle books or whatever, and read through it for that section that is on the feast days, and he'll go through and explain it. Now, he's not going to get into the kind of detail that's in, David Chilton's book and some of the other materials that you'll find, but at least, for a person that's just starting, if you will ignore the dispensationalism that's in the book, because he's definitely going to try to sell you on that, but just read that section, and I've referred to it several times, and it certainly has helped me to have a foundation to move on to some of the other more intricately detailed works on these days. So, I'm not the kind of person that would highly recommend a dispensationalist book, but I've got all kind of books in my library, and I have to read around them. You pick out what's good and you leave what's not good. But I thought I'd mention that one as well for people that's just kind of wanted to get their feet wet. And I didn't buy the. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, we do have to do that on occasion. We have to get the dispensational books because, as I mentioned a few moments ago, dispensationalists have actually done some of the best work on the feast days. They just completely missed the first century application that Jesus himself makes. That
right.
The New Testament writers themselves make. And by the way, since you mentioned another dispensational book, there is a dispensational writer. His name is Avi Ben Mordecai. He wrote some years ago. He wrote a book. Let me see, what was the name of that book? Signs in the Heavens. Let me see if I can find that in my file real quick. Okay, yeah. Signs in the Heaven, a Jewish Messianic perspective of the last days and the coming millennium. He wrote in 1999, and he actually predicted the coming of the Lord that was going to be within 8 to 10 years. Okay, so obviously he missed it. He was so typical of so many other dispensationalists who went about predicting the end. And yet, he makes some really fantastic comments, makes some great points. For instance, he points out the theme of the first day of the seventh month, the Feast of Trumpets, is marriage. It's not only judgment, it's marriage.
Yes.
Well, what happens in the book of Revelation at the sounding of the seventh trumpet? Well, you have not only the judgment, but you have the resurrection, and you have the marriage of the bridegroom. And so,
let me
go ahead.
Interject here. It's also important to see the marriage in Matthew 24 and Matthew 25, because in verse 31, of course, you got the sounding of the trumpets, and then immediately following, you have the parable of the 10 virgins, which is the parable of the marriage. And one other point on that, since we're talking about it, if you look very carefully at the three parables that Jesus uses in Matthew 25, each of them corresponds with one of the names of the Feast of Trumpets. You got the feast of, you have the wedding feast, which we were talking about, or the marriage. The other parable, you've got one about the judgment and the coronation of the king. Well, that one is there, the opening of the books, etc. So you have that parable in Matthew 25 when Christ comes to separate the sheep from the goats, etc. Well, that's also one of the names of the Feast of Trumpets. It's, that's one of the themes of that feast day. And the other one is about, what is the other one about? About the man traveling into a far country and the talents. I can't think of the one, but there is one that aligns with that feast, with that parable as well. So these are not just arbitrarily placed there. Jesus wasn't just throwing things out there, like as they say, throwing some mud up against the wall, hoping that some sticks. No, this was a very well organized dissertation on the feast days, and anyone familiar with those feast days would have immediately recognized how he was laying that material out, and that's what makes it so impressive when you take a look at it.
Well, you're exactly right. As a matter of fact, there were 10 names for the Feast of Trumpets, as you well know. You and I discussed this a good long while back. And when you start looking at all of the themes related to eschatology, all of a sudden, boom, these names, you can just see, you can just see that the New Testament writers are drawing on their awareness of these concepts. Yom Teruah, the day of the awakening blast, is Teruah, and that's the Feast of Trumpets. Well, that's for the awakening of the dead. That's resurrection. And, like I said, you've got these 10 names, and I'm like you, I don't remember all of them at the moment. But once again, to fail to see how the New Testament writers were incorporating the terminology, the vernacular, the common sayings of the feast days when they write about the coming of the Lord, the judgment, and the resurrection. Let me see. I'm trying to remember. One of the names was something like Yom Hadin or something like that.
Yeah,
the day of
Yom Hadin. That's the day of judgment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the day of judgment. Well, do we find the day of judgment in the New Testament or not? You could not. This is what's so important. This is what continually impresses itself on me, William. I was raised in an environment like you that seemed to believe that communicated, purposely or not, that communicated the idea that Jesus was raised in a theological vacuum, distinct, independent of, and separate from the real Jewish world. Because after all, he came to do away with it. He had something totally different, something totally unrelated to it. Therefore, studying Jewish history, studying Jewish tradition, studying Jewish terminology really is it's no benefit to us at all. It's just wasting our time. But hopefully, as I was able to point out there on Saturday, that is absolutely false. Everywhere we go in the New Testament, every book that we look at in the New Testament should bring to our mind, if we are attuned to it, if we are familiar with that culture, should bring to our mind what was happening, what was going on. And as I've told people many, many times, very few writers in modern times do a better job of bringing out these relationships than, or more than, N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright, for instance, in his book, Jesus and the Victory of God, just does an absolutely fantastic job of going through the parables and showing how in the parables, how the Jewish culture, and what's interesting to me is that Tom N.T. Wright doesn't focus an awful lot on the feast days. He simply says, I have a file in my database pointing out, or with a few quotes from N.T. Wright, just simply making the assertion that, for instance, one of the reasons, Tom Wright says, one of the reasons that Jesus did not discuss the Jewish Sabbath an awful lot, although he certainly was in controversy with the Jews about it, Matthew chapter 12, John chapter 5, John chapter 9. He certainly was in controversy with the Jews about them, but one of the reasons Jesus didn't talk about it so much is because he knew it was about to pass away. I think that's really a misunderstanding. I really do. It fails to understand that the ultimate fulfillment of the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, was not in the life of Jesus. It came through his work. It came through the completion of his work. That's why the writer of Hebrews could say in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 10, therefore there remains a Sabbath for the children of God. Sabbath had not yet been fulfilled. If it was fulfilled, then it didn't remain to be fulfilled. But in Revelation chapter 14, verse 13, at the coming of the Lord, as John writes, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from henceforth, for yea, they shall rest from their labors. That word rest there is from the Greek word anapausis, which is almost a technical word for the Sabbath rest. In other words, at the coming of the Lord, the Sabbath rest comes into being, comes into full play. And so to miss these connections, seemingly, Tom Wright just almost dismissively does away with the last three feast days and simply says, well, they've all been fulfilled. Thomas Wright obviously does not see the significance of the fulfillment of the last three Jewish feast days. It's incredible for someone with his erudition to miss these points. But again, it goes back to, if you want someone who does a great job of pointing out how the parables of Jesus, how the life of Jesus, how the teaching of Jesus does such a magnificent job of bringing meaning to the life and the culture of the Jews of the first century, then his book, Jesus and the Victory of God, is an absolute, it's just absolutely fantastic. I draw it off the shelf every once in a while and look up references in it because he is so very, very good. But here's the interesting thing. William, as you were taking note of a moment ago, and it's part of my study as well, all three of the parables in Matthew chapter 25 are related to one of the feast days or to one aspect of the feast days. Thomas Wright does a great job of pointing out that the parable of the bridegroom and the 10 wise, 10 foolish virgins is the story of the return of Yahweh to remarry his people as promised in Hosea. Well, wonderful. That's great. Why don't you relate to that to the feast days? Why don't you relate that to the Feast of the Trumpets? Why don't you relate that even to the new creation? Because, by the way, William, as you know, I correspond very regularly with this Jewish scholar, Hebrew scholar from Israel, who has invited Jan and me to go over there next year. We currently have our plans made to do that. We're trying to gather up our pennies. We may have to do a GoFundMe to be able to do that. But nonetheless, I recently asked him, because I'd been doing an awful lot of study, and I had run on to a just almost a passing reference and a claim that said when a couple got married, it was viewed as a new creation. It was viewed as a time when all prior sins for both the man and the woman were forgiven. Wow. Think about that.
Done.
Do what? Hello? Hello? William, are you there? Hello? Hello? William, did you lose me or did I lose you? Which is it? Are you there? Hello, hello? Hello? Well, folks, I don't know if you can hear me or not here. I can hear William, but obviously he can't hear me. I don't know if that means that I'm still on air. I'm not seeing anything that would indicate that I've been cut off.
No. You're good. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you there.
Okay. Everything's good.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very good. William, what I was starting to say before I heard you say that had been cut off is that my friend in Israel, the Hebrew scholar, I had read a reference in some book, don't even know what it is, but this book had made mention of the fact, it almost seemed like a statement in passing. When a couple got married, it was viewed as a new creation. Their marriage was viewed as a new creation. And that when they got married, all sins, all former sin of both the man and the woman were completely forgiven. And I asked my friend in Israel about that, and he said that's absolutely true. That is a widespread concept in Jewish writings down through the centuries. Well, just think about that in Revelation chapter 18. Revelation chapter 18 and 19, chapter 19 and verse 16 or verse 6, let us rejoice and be glad, for the time of the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Revelation chapter 21, I saw the New Jerusalem coming down from God as a bride prepared for her husband, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. So here once again we see the interplay, the interconnection with the concept of the Jewish festivals. Okay, what takes place at Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets? That's the marriage concept in Israel. That's the feast that indicates marriage. But it bleeds over into, guess what? Shemini Atzerat, which is the new creation, the celebration of the new creation. So once again, we find this interrelationship, this interplay with the concepts of the Jewish feast days being played out. It may be subtle. It may not be overt as to saying, well, this feast symbolized this and this feast symbolized that. No, that's not the way it would have been done in the first place. It's not the way the Jews would have expressed it. The Jews didn't have to say, now keep in mind that our Feast of Teruah symbolized marriage. Everybody remember that? No. If you're mentioning marriage, you're mentioning the trumpets. And that's exactly what happens in the book of Revelation. If you're mentioning judgment, you're mentioning Feast of Trumpets. If you're mentioning marriage, you're mentioning new creation. That's in the Revelation. And so it is our failure, it is our ignorance. And I said that openly from the pulpit there in Memphis. In my ignorance, I once said this and that and the other. And as a beloved elder from my early ministry life used to say, and this man got up and began studying at 6 o'clock every morning, and he studied until 8 or 9 o'clock. He taught himself the Greek. He could read the Greek as well as he could read the English. He understood it. But he told me one day, at almost 90 years of age, the more I study, the less I know. And the more I study, the more I realize how little I have known and what an incredible responsibility it is to try to learn and to know the heart and the mind of God even better. And with that, William, we are out of time. Boy, tonight's show really went fast. Some might say this was not about the feast days, but it really has been. And I hope you can see the connections. Folks, want to thank you for joining us for tonight's program here on Two Guys in the Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. Be sure to join us again next week. And with that, I'm going to say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in the Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.